Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the show. My name is Clarke Towson and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of INTJ, a Melbourne-based high-performance computing contracting company. Today I have a very special guest in the studio, Mr. Greg Lee from GMCL and Associates and Sales Assess, who has flown down from Sydney to be here today. Greg is a highly experienced and accomplished management consultant, trainer and facilitator. Greg has been involved in the technology industry since 1977 after his initial degree in computer science, then sales and management since 1983, training since 1987 and consulting since 1992, with IBM for many years, then Mercury International, Workforce Transformations, Bid Direction, and now his own company, GMCL and Associates. GMCL specialise in the professional development of people in consulting, sales-related roles, customer service and management, and they aim to enhance the knowledge, understanding, skills, motivation and self-management of sales professionals in Australia and elsewhere by providing advice, guidance and tools. Welcome to the program, Greg.
Thank you, Clarke. Good to be here. Good to be in Melbourne again, and nice to catch up with you again.
Great stuff. It's great to have you here in the studio. Always a pleasure catching up with you. We're here today to discuss your new book that you've just released, and it's titled So Now You're a Sales Manager, What Every Sales Manager Should Know About Sales Management from Day One. Now, rest assured, Greg, I've done my research here. I've read your book, and I really like it. And I learned a lot from it as well, as I always do from your material. As you know, I don't come from a sales background. My background is IT, but I've got friends overseas who are running public-facing businesses and who are managing sales teams who would benefit from the knowledge in your book. In fact, I've been spending some time in some of these businesses on my recent holiday to Thailand and observing how these businesses are run and what improvements can be made. So let's get right to your book and talk first about one of the models in it. I always like models. The suspect, prospect, customer model. And this model says that the business strategy should be to build, retain and grow a loyal, premium, rebuying customer base by converting more serious prospects into first-time customers and then into repeat customers. Now, I really like this model, Greg. It's worthy of going up on my fridge, and that's where I place all the great quotes from my friends and business ideas and business models. So my first question for you, do you think that you could maybe explain a little bit more about this suspect, prospect, customer model to our listeners, as I think that anyone who's running a business can benefit from using it? As I said, I've got friends who are overseas and some friends who are in the public eye, and their initial suspects come via people dropping into their business. They run bars, guest houses, and other publicly facing businesses. Or they get their contacts from web-based contact forms, as they've got video of themselves. They do a lot of media work on YouTube. And they would be very interested in turning more suspects into prospects and repeat customers, and especially to create loyal repeat buyers.
Yes, well, various studies have shown, Clarke, that it costs up to 7 times more to acquire a new customer than it does to retain an existing one.
Yep.
So from a purely commercial sense, it should make sense that once you've got a customer, you want to hang on to them. Now, you can't mandate that in a legal sense, so the implication is that you continue providing what you provided the first time and you do it well, and they have a good experience of dealing with you and utilising your product or service. Yep. Ideally, then, that they would want to come back and do that again, maybe buy something else in your kit bag, and or maybe go and tell a few more of their friends about their experience.
Yep.
So that should be where you get that real economy of effort once you've got a customer.
Okay.
At the other end of the model, the challenge is how do you get one the first time?
Yep.
And you can spend a fortune on rent, putting yourself in the high street so you get the walk-in trade, or you spend a lot on advertising to let people know where you are or who you are, how to contact you, whether that's in a physical sense or a digital sense. And in the business-to-business world, you can pay professional salespeople a lot of money to make cold calls, to go and have first appointments with people. So there's a lot of work goes on there. In fact, I've even got clients who do it at conferences.
Okay.
Work the floor at the conference, work the floor at the 5:30 cocktails,
Yep.
etc., swapping cards. So there's a lot of different ways that different industries in B2C or B2B go about that initial contact. Even in different cultures, that can be done different ways.
Yep.
But still, the phases of the sale from that point on ought to be quite similar. How do you establish need, qualify the prospect, give them what they want, make sure that worked, and then attempt to get the rebuying going. So it's quite a cyclical or circular process, but if you do it right, you ought not to have to keep going back and getting lots more new, cold suspects from the beginning. It should get better as you start to get more leads and referrals from your existing customer base. So that's what the model's all about.
Very good. I know that Warren Buffett is a big fan of buying businesses that are in the business of repeat purchase.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, one of his favourite businesses is Coca-Cola, and that's a repeat purchase product. People love the product and they just keep on buying it over time, right?
Yeah.
So I guess once they've acquired one customer once, they've sort of got them for life, right? If they like the product. So
Yeah, absolutely.
very important to have that repeat purchase sort of behaviour from your customers.
And since you raised them as an example, I think 5 of the top 10 selling items in Australian supermarkets are Coca-Cola products.
Yep.
So they do it well.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk a little now about understanding salespersons' motivations. Now, in the book, I liked Andy's advice about seeking to understand what specifically motivates each individual, and about how, if it's money, finding out what they would do with, or what a person would do with that money. I think it's important to understand the motivations of the people who work for you. As I mentioned, I've got friends in Thailand. One of them who actually owns and runs a bar and a guest house with his partner, and the staff that work there, they're very motivated to make money, but it's not just to survive themselves. They're actually sending a lot of money back home to their families in the village, and this is one of, if not the, key motivating factors of these people to lift their families out of poverty. Can you talk maybe a little bit more about the benefits you see in understanding more about the motivations of your sales team?
Yeah, and traditionally when we talk about sales team, I'm thinking more there of B2B as opposed to B2C, business to consumer, where it's more marketing driven. But if you're talking about sales teams, people in your direct employ, then the concept is that you could play a very passive role as a sales manager. You know, earlier in the book we talk about the role of a sales manager, ultimately to achieve results through these people who report to you. And if you see a sales manager as being responsible for a slice of the company's equity, then have we deployed the equity or the assets appropriately, and do we maximise the return we get on those assets? It sounds pretty cold, doesn't it? Sales people are human beings too, but they're also units of employment. Yeah. So, given that they're human beings, there's quite a significant difference we can make if we can manage to push the right buttons. In academia, and as part of my doctoral research, we look for a variable called discretionary effort. And a lot of research says, well, if salespeople just get out of bed earlier in the morning and make more calls, carry out more activity, they will generate more outcomes. Yep. Not always higher quality, but normally in a linear sense, you'll get more in volume. Okay. So as a minimum, you want to push that button. But what will make them make that discretionary effort? What makes them set the alarm half an hour earlier or jump out of bed before the alarm's got off? And that comes from very different places for different people. Yep. Some people are intrinsically motivated. They like the nature of the work. They like the outcomes they create, or they just like doing good quality work or accurate work. You know, if I'm an accountant and I balance the ledger on the 29th of the month, I want it to balance down to the cent. I get a real kick out of that. Yep. Yep. That's not for everybody. Yep. Others need extrinsic motivation. I want the dollars so I can buy the latest gadgets to show off to my friends how cool I am, buy a fancy car, live in a nice house, whatever. I want people to observe that I'm successful. I want to be in the company newsletter. I want the management to stand me up and give me a pat. So, you know, even personalities have very different styles of motivation. Yep. And then those things might vary according to different stages in people's personal maturity or their personal life. For example, 25-year-olds may need lots of discretionary money to spend on clubbing. 45-year-olds have got to worry about funding their kids, getting through high school and maybe into uni or starting up their own business or buying their first apartment. So even that can vary over stages of people's personal growth. So very, very important for sales managers to know where their people are in a personal sense without prying, but just enough to know why they come to work, what's going on outside, how can I push that motivation button, and maybe even how can I work with them to be a little more flexible, to make work fit into their larger work-life equation. Yep. Any of those things would be fine things if sales management could do that a little differently for the various members of their team.
Interesting. I know in the computer world, I work in IT, and when I was back at university, I was very interested in computer security and computer system penetration. I was very interested in Linux and hacking and all the rest of that stuff. And sometimes business people can't really grasp the fact that a lot of these IT people, they're so intrinsically motivated because they're obsessed with systems and with playing with systems and trying to break things, and they couldn't understand, well, why would a person do this for free? Right? Who are these people? Are they crazy? But this is just the way that they are. So it is interesting the different motivations that people can have.
And you don't win a lot of money if you win the hackathon.
This is it.
But you get cred.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's definitely. And I was an old programmer, so I understood that kick.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is about the creativity of the solution or the elegance of the technical solution. You can get a real kick about that. Just got to watch we don't over-engineer that, because maybe someone's not seeing the same amount of value and doesn't want to pay for all of that engineering. But
exactly. Very good point. Okay, so you're a manager now. Do not attempt to be their friend. That's some advice that you give in the book. And, it was phrased differently in the book, The 48 Laws of Power. It was actually under Law 2. And the Law 2 said, never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies. But it said that the problem with working with friends is that it confuses the boundaries and distances that working requires. If both partners in the arrangement understand the dangers involved, a friend can often or can be employed to great effect. But you must never let your guard down in such a venture. However, always be on the lookout for any signs of emotional disturbances such as envy and ingratitude. Nothing is stable in the realm of power, and even the closest of friends can be transformed into the worst of enemies. It's interesting, isn't it? They put it in a different way to yourself, but that book is a very Machiavelli sort of type of book.
That's exactly the name that came to mind.
Yeah. I like the table of the target and the current performance of each salesperson in the team. What gets measured gets managed, and seeing the estimates of the sales team's current performance in year-to-date sales, I think, is a very useful tool to make an assessment of each sales team member.
Yeah, I think that's a key point of the book. Even my editors and my proofreaders have commented there's a lot of mathematics in my approach to sales management. That's partly because I'm a mathematician by trade, so I'm comfortable working with numbers.
Yep.
It's also because that's the way IBM used to run their business. I worked for a while in the business planning function of IBM, and we cut the business every which way. We had to know where all the different numbers were, and they all had to add up eventually to the right number that we were all chasing as a state or a country or a region. We just kind of got used to doing it that way. And I honestly can't see how you can run a sales function properly if you don't have some visibility of those numbers.
Yep.
Even if it's not your forte, you can employ an analyst to pore over the numbers and tell you what the numbers are saying. But if you don't have any measures, you can't compare the actual to a plan. Apollo 11 was only on track 3% of the time. But at least they had a planned trajectory, something to measure against, and then make live management or operational decisions. So if you don't have a plan, and if you're not counting the actuals, you can't make these sort of decisions. You're just leaving it up to people's intuition, good fortune. It's not good enough.
And so much of business is about numbers and about making the numbers. And a corporation can be said to exist for the purpose of making profit, making a return for shareholders. Of course, the corporation's got has to make products or services that appeal to people. But at the end of the day, if you think of the share market as like a racing track, and all the businesses are in a constant cycle of production and production of goods and services for the consumer. So it's interesting.
And sometimes you can tell anecdotally what's going on. Sometimes it's really obvious, but sometimes you need the numbers to give you a bit more fine-tuning.
Yep.
And any marketers listening to this broadcast will know the concepts of, well, we want to put a prototype out in the market and test it. Well, we'll probably put 3 or 4 or 5 versions of that prototype out there and see which one flies.
Yep.
But we want to do that numerically as well as kind of intuitively.
Yep. Very good points. Now, I really like the lessons from Mick's experience, especially look after both sales and people. And of course, how important is that, right? People, without whom we would not get any results. A well-planned and methodical approach to how you manage your team is vital. I really like that point, Greg.
Well, it'll sound a little condescending, I'm aware, but it's almost like managing children. The odd one can function without much guidance or boundary, but most kids, while they're still forming their self-esteem and their identity, they need some boundaries and they need some guidance. So even adults need some kind of standards that they're working to, and they'd like to know the manager has a concept of what it should look like and can explain why that's important, and then sticks to the standards and is consistent in their ongoing behaviour and implementation of the standards. And calls out falling short of the standards. I even saw it on a TV show recently. The boss was difficult in a purely interpersonal sense. However, he was very, very consistent. Tough but consistent. And most of the people actually preferred to work in that environment.
And so much about leadership is replicating your own leadership to others and pulling them up to a higher level. And I know with the work that you've been doing in my day job, that's the whole reason you were brought in to the organisation to bring people up so that they had a greater appreciation of leadership and management and could get better results as well. Let's move on to talking a little bit about sales forecasting. The forecasting approach, number 3 in the book, all in to some extent, and adding up the weighted average of all opportunities in the pipeline, the superior approach to forecasting. I think in our minds, at least I know myself, I've got a background in statistics. I'm always sort of looking at the odds of success or failure of whatever I'm undertaking. And I really like this idea of having a percentage win odds for sales. I think each salesperson has an idea in their minds anyway as to this number, so it makes sense to add it to the forecast spreadsheet table. But having a systematic approach that doesn't rely on salespeople's and managers' gut feelings is good. I think the weighted percentages stages in the sales cycle, I'm sort of thinking now of everything I've been involved in from a company in my role at DST Group, and I can see that if I put myself in the shoes of the seller, this sales cycle they all go through to make a sale to us. And having it weighted in percentages I really like. Having the sales team adopt this as a consistent approach, freeing it up to you as putting it up to you as a sales manager, I think that can be very useful for the forecast table to see at a glance where each sale is at in the sales cycle and where each salesperson is as well.
Yeah, it's a good point you raised, Clarke. I'm having a little chuckle on the inside here. I've had a lot of pushback with this point over the years. Because salespeople who've not been in a sales management role, and if they don't have the background you and I have in statistics, they're inclined to say, hey, why do you go to all of this bother when I just kind of know already this one's going to get up, this one's not. And if you've only got 1 or 2, that's okay. But if I'm your manager and I have 10 salespeople like you, then when I aggregate them, I have 10 to 20. And it's too subjective across 10 or 20 at my level. When I pass it up the line, I have to have more science and structure. So even if the individual salespeople don't get it, the sales manager must have a more robust, consistent vehicle for doing this kind of work. You just can't rely on because some people are more conservative than others. You know, your 60% might be more optimistic or pessimistic than my 60%. So
that's very true.
It's flawed in that sense.
So overall, I really like the approach that you've taken in your book. I think that appeal to sales managers who most of the time will be previous salespeople who tend to like that more conversationalist and practical approach instead of, say, a dry textbook approach. My only real suggestion to you would be to maybe consider creating an audio version of your book as well, and maybe some content for YouTube. I think you could build quite a following on YouTube.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I'm in the process right now, just being at launch point of taking as much feedback as I can, and a number of these ideas are going around. The structure of the book means I could easily chop it up into those chapter headings and do pieces by chapter or sub-chapter, so I can keep making it more and more granular, going down to more detail in smaller bite-sized pieces. Mm-hmm. I would like to do an audio version. I hadn't thought of that before, but I certainly have been thinking about smaller YouTube clips, particularly if I get to talk to a model, what are some of those models and frameworks that we've been talking about. Yeah. So I'm getting quite excited about that, and now the hardest work's done. It gets easier from here, I hope.
Yep, definitely. I like the when invoice column on your forecast table as well for the sales team. I think this could be used by the finance people to forecast revenues, which particularly if it was, say, a public corporation, could be very useful for letting the market know what the forecast revenue is for the year. Why do sales coaching? Making assumptions regarding motivations and personalities was highly risky. What's that saying about making assumptions being the mother of all screw-ups?
Yeah. In the very polite form.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed, making assumptions is natural,
yeah.
And sometimes that's what we call experience.
Yeah.
Your assumptions ought to be 80% right when you've been around a while.
Yeah.
If you're working in your core space. Mm-hmm. But if it's a new situation or a different situation, you're out on the edge of your domain knowledge, your assumptions become less accurate, yep. More problematic.
Yep.
It's still dangerous in an intellectual sense to make too many leaps of logic if you really haven't worked through the cause and effect, the causal relationship. So yep. We're trying to get out of that kind of process, but some assumptions are okay.
Yep.
I'm just trying to reduce the amount of subjectivity in the process.
Yeah. I know whenever I use the word assume to one of the managers at work, he doesn't like it. He's always, yeah, Clarke, that was your problem right there. Assume.
And that's what sales managers do. Either they say, I'll assume they're all the same. They're all salespeople, so I'll treat them all the same way. That's one mistake. Secondly, I'll assume they're all like me, or they're all motivated by the same things. See, there's some classic kinds of assumptions that are made that, based on our earlier discussion, that already have you in big trouble when you're really trying to find the magic buttons and achieve big discretionary effort.
Definitely. Okay, so let's move on to motivations. People have different motivations, and I know my motivations are vastly different to those around me at work, especially these days. I particularly liked Andy's advice in the book that spending time on coaching in a sales environment was one of the best ways to create value and generate motivation in salespeople working in IT. Great and generate motivation in salespeople. For myself working in IT, I see the great value that comes from coaching. And I know that your coaching over the years I've found particularly valuable, Greg. Essentially, what you've done, you've raised mine and other members of our team's consciousness about important topics that help us better understand ourselves and each other. And what's the real task of a leader again? Of course, it's to help the group find greatness in itself, in each other, and for the leader to replicate his leadership to grow more leaders. And we know that the results of these group activities, coaching sessions facilitated by yourself, have a way of growing each of us as leaders. And I guess it operates similarly to the economics of supply and demand. You're providing the required resource, leadership, that the group needs as it lacks it, but after you leave, you've hopefully replicated your leadership in each of us so we can better take care of ourselves and each other. The whole concept of coaching the sales team, I can see it paying dividends, not just in the short term, but particularly over the long term, with the team members raising their level of leadership and thus becoming better salespeople.
It's a lesson I learned a long time ago, Clarke, at IBM, and the disclaimer I'll put on this was easy to do in a company that was making good margins and was growing. It's tougher in a constrained environment, but still the principle ought to apply, particularly in the sense of disruption, the ongoing search for cost effectiveness.
Yep.
You know, could we get rid of some of these costly carbon-based units and replace them with bots? It's tempting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it would be tempting if you don't fully understand the value that the carbon-based units add that we haven't yet been able to replicate with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
We'll get closer, but we haven't done it all yet. So one of my challenges as a manager in IBM was to work myself out of my current job.
Yeah.
To the point where the team, either I've appointed a successor out of the team, and I should always have at least two in the team who could step in at short notice.
Yeah.
Or they could almost become self-managing, and you save a headcount by not needing a standalone manager.
Yep.
These guys just know what they're doing.
Yep.
Now, occasionally someone has to make an arbitrary decision if you've got even numbers of people. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I'll go and find another job, a bigger job, and that's how I get promoted.
Yep.
One of these people gets promoted,
yep.
etc. So whether it's self-leadership, greater autonomy, and then you get a real economy of scale there because you can bring in younger people who are malleable. You can apprentice them to these existing self-managed people. They will teach them. They don't need you around to teach them. You give these guys an apprentice who can do some of their more boring work, and you grow them. So your cost of resources keeps going down, but your output keeps going up, yep. All because you did the right job as a manager and put in place the processes, the structures, the understanding.
Yep. And it's all about the energy that you're putting into others. I know you may have heard of this man. His name's Grigory Perelman. He solved the Poincaré conjecture. He's a Russian mathematician, and he's a bit out there. Some of the things that he does, he walked away from the profession. And one of his peers said something interesting. He said, Grigory had been brought up in mathematics, he'd been trained extensively, a lot of people had embodied a lot of energy in him, and then he walked away, right? So it is interesting. I think we put our energy into other people, and we want to grow them and bring them up. Of course, the risk is potentially they'll walk away, but I think it's always worth the time and effort that you're putting into people, regardless of whether they walk away or not. I don't like the fear-based sort of approach.
No. If you do it out of love, and it's not about your ego, it's about genuinely creating value for the other people.
Yeah.
If the converse is unhealthy, if you want to cling to power, you want all the glory. You're creating a cult.
Yeah.
You make them dependent on you. You're not doing them a favour at all.
Exactly.
If, however, you truly do want to grow them so they become stronger and they can do without you, they'll stay your friends anyway.
Yeah.
But that's much more empowering, and it's a force for good rather than for evil. And
there's been so many examples throughout history of cults that have, and people who cult leaders who have done this sort of stuff, and that's the way that they sort of operate. It's obviously the wrong approach, but we want to be empowering people at the end of the day. Now, Mick's letter to his dad, aren't there some risks in making your people better at what they do? And his father's reply, I think, shows wisdom. I think of people I know who are in cross-cultural relationships with Thais in Thailand and are fearful exposing them to the Western world. It's a double-edged sword, but perhaps the risk is worth it as it broadens the Thai person's mind and gives them a better appreciation of our culture and society at the risk of them becoming westernised, so to speak. And as I said, I think really it's always a risk when you focus on empowering people, but that's your job as a leader and as a sales manager. And there's something I like. There's something I think you and I definitely have in common, and that's our desire to empower others. And I like Mick's coaching table, data table, and having the gross percentage margin as a column and percentage share, our typical share of the customer's expenditure. It's nice to see that at a glance. I also loved your confidence clock. I'm going to print that out and stick it up on my fridge. The coaching sandwich, I like that one. I think you're very good at that approach, by the way, in your years with dealing with myself. Did you want to maybe talk a little bit about these concepts, the confidence clock and the coaching sandwich concepts?
Yep.
Yeah.
Firstly, the coaching sandwich. Let's start there. I've had a number of people over the years say to me, "Oh, look, I'm old enough and ugly enough. That is, I'm big and hard and tough, and I have a very thick skin. So just give me the feedback directly. I'll cope with it." And yet, I've accidentally managed to make several grown men cry in my career, not deliberately, but so sometimes the big tough people aren't always as tough because inside they're still human beings. So I still recommend an approach that's slightly more humanistic rather than giving it to people right between the eyes.
Yeah.
You need to not soft soap it too much. They need to understand the message, the coaching message, but I still think you can wrap it with something that's a bit more digestible, palatable, in order for the, well, what did Julie Andrews say? Spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach.
Even for us rough, tough adults.
Yeah.
So that's where that one comes from.
Yeah.
A little bit of packaging will help. It's just a more humanistic approach.
Yeah, definitely.
So the other one is the confidence clock. Really, this goes to the whole point of don't just use the one style with all people in all situations. Different situations and different personalities will demand a slightly nuanced approach on occasions.
Yep.
Be aware of your default style and be aware that just now and again you might need to tweak that a little bit for the current real-time situation and this person sitting right in front of you.
Yep.
And even if you only just vary it occasionally, they will at least notice you're making some effort to tailor your discussion to them rather than just applying a big broad brush all
Yep.
the time.
Yep. Very good.
It's as simple as that. It's a little harder to execute in real time,
Yep.
but as long as the model and the concept is clear in your mind, at least you can try to execute on that.
Yep. Very good. The joint sales visit. I found that particularly interesting. I think the benefits outweigh the negatives. Now, a great example of a joint sales visit was in the movie The Firm, and that's when the two lawyers go to meet Sonny. Have you seen the movie The Firm?
I haven't seen the movie, no, but I've had a look at this clip since you brought it to my attention.
You have?
Yeah.
Very good. I was going to play the clip. I think we should play the clip, actually. We can always cut it out later if we don't like it, but
Sure.
I'll play the clip because I think it's a very, very good one. So they go now
There was a plane crash
Here we
last
go.
week. We didn't take a boat to the Caymans, did we?
That's ridiculous, Sonny. Let us sit down with you for 5 minutes. Thank you. Son of a bitch pays less than 5% tax and wants to fire us. A Hyatt.
This new plan is very aggressive, Sonny, and it defers all your tax liability for years.
And you could start right away.
Oh, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can't talk right now.
These taxes are only deferred, right?
The future value of the tax dollars will be less than half their present value
Who says?
after the election.
Are you telling me who's going to be in the White House the next 4 years? Because that would be valuable information.
Well,
Mr. Toller has a plan that meets all your needs, whoever's in the White House.
Let him tell me.
He's been trying to.
Hey, who the fuck are you? His lawyer or mine?
Either one, sir.
What the fuck are you doing here?
Sonny, you're not the firm's only concern here. We put you into deals with other clients where they may be very sensitive about exposing their relationships to outside attorneys.
You hear that, counselor? That's a veiled threat. If you're talking about our friends in Chicago, they don't make money when I pay you fees. You make money when I pay you fees. They make money being in business with me. And as long as they're making money, they don't give a flying fuck who does my taxes. Hey, you don't know me. I'm a nice guy. You lose $1 million for me, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm not gonna break your legs.
Sonny, let's don't get carried away here, all right?
What did I say? What did I say?
Maybe it's what you didn't say.
What I didn't say. What didn't I say?
Thank you. Mr. Toller handed you a schedule that virtually guarantees you zero tax with zero risk. The basis of your stock would be the face amount of the installment note, but the stock would have no value. Even so, it's deducted and offsets income. You defer your tax in full, even though you have a bankable LC.
Deferred till when?
What do you care? Whenever it is, it's still the best interest-free loan you'll ever get.
So the worst is I pay my taxes much, much later?
No. The worst thing is next year, they're gonna close a loophole, change the regs, and if you haven't grabbed this proposal, you're gonna feel like you're a dick big enough for an elephant to feel it.
You know that for a fact?
Now, I think that's a very good clip, and it shows here's one of them's the protege, and you've got the guy who's got all the knowledge and the skills, puts him into a risky situation, and we have an end result like that. It turned out well, but there was a big risk that he took by bringing him to that situation, right?
Yes. And it may be in the movie they had a deeper discussion and did more prep, and they were actually reacting to pre-agreed roles, but that wasn't actually shown in the clip. It's more likely they didn't do that homework, and therefore they are lucky to get that outcome.
Yeah.
And you've illustrated perfectly some of the 10 ways, you remember in the book, at least 10 ways sales visits can go wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, several of them in that clip. It's great.
Yeah, I know in my professional life, especially when I first started my career, there were situations that I was, sort of shielded from, or before I was put into those situations, I was coached substantially so that I didn't say the wrong thing. And I can only see now with wisdom and experience and a bit of age that my manager was actually doing the right thing by shielding me, sort of thing, and making sure that I was fully prepared.
Yeah, and when you're young, particularly if you're smart, you're a quick learner, it's an offence to your intelligence, isn't it? And that's why you sort of bridle against being held back, or why are you underestimating me so? And yet it's negligent of a manager if they don't do that, just like it's negligent of a parent if they don't set some kind of boundaries for kids, just leaving it to the kids to work it out for themselves.
Yep.
So I use that word a lot in management. It's negligent if they don't do some of this, even if it's painful.
Yep, definitely needs to be done. And hey, at the end of the day, if everything goes wrong during the joint sales visit, how about a new concept? The sales manager could open his briefcase and hand his salesman the shit sandwich. Like that one?
Well, you've got the ultimate power over them.
Yeah.
But you don't want to have to resort to that.
Yeah.
Which is another point we haven't formally covered yet. But in terms of standards we talked about, consistency, the rest of the team actually want to see you being fair and equitable to each of their colleagues. They don't want to see you dumping too heavily on someone when it was just a human mistake. When they know you didn't give them the coaching, you threw them in at the deep end. They don't want to see you then apportion the blame inappropriately.
Yeah.
These things are opportunities to get it really right.
Yeah.
Or really, really wrong.
Yeah, very good. A bit more on motivation. I've got a friend who's a salesman, and in your book, you talk about the preeminent seminal academic work on salespeople or salesperson motivation, reward theory, which suggests that salespeople will apply effort if they believe that effort will translate into results, and those results will translate into rewards. Is there sufficient reward for effort, or else why bother? Now, my salesperson friend is bone idle lazy. Money is the only thing that motivates him. I've never seen him do anything for free or for non-payment. Never. Claims he never will either. So it is interesting when I think about his motivation. Right. In fact, a friend of mine summed him up very quickly as soon as he met him. He actually came over to the house in Port Melbourne when I was living with a housemate at the time. And when he left, my housemate turned to me and he said, "Clarke, your friend's a leech." And I never forgot that. I'm like, wow, he just met him, but he summed him up like that. And this guy was a very, very good judge of character.
So there's a way, Clarke, to manage these people in a sales environment, and the way you do it is you treat them as a pure agent.
Yeah.
You only pay them commission when they sell something.
Okay.
If they sell nothing, you don't pay them anything.
Yeah.
You probably don't even want them attached to your brand, but if you can make it an independent, commission-only sales agent of your business, you can keep them at arm's length and it doesn't cost you. The day you start paying them an advance or give them a base salary, I think that implies a contractual obligation for them to behave in certain professional ways and to perform some minimum levels of activity and to not damage your brand.
Yeah.
But if you don't pay them anything, you can keep them at arm's length.
Yeah.
So I've seen cats like this.
Yep.
They got their place.
Yep.
But you have to put tight fences around them.
Yeah, I really like that, and I think that's great advice. And I've got another friend who uses that same concept, that arm's length concept to make sure that certain people in his life are kept at that arm's length for his own protection. So it works both in the business world as well as in the personal world.
Yeah,
so.
indeed.
The part about equity I found interesting, that salespeople can indeed be demotivated. My friend, the salesman, was telling me about a colleague of his who was making an incredible amount of sales, so much so that he became very suspicious as to how he was achieving this and making so much money. So he started watching him to determine how he was gaming the system. And then he went and informed his sales manager about him. And to my knowledge, he still didn't work out how this guy was making all this money, making all these sales. Apparently, the guy ended up transferring out to a small or a medium business area. So he no longer works alongside my friend. But he questioned this, though, like, how could this guy make all this money? He was making about $15,000 a month commission. Why would he move? He noted that his new role was minimum commission. All right? So it was very sort of odd behaviour. He was making all this money and then moved for minimum commission. So I think something was definitely going on there that wasn't sort of right. Maybe the business just didn't catch him.
It could be. It's too hard to tell. If this was a case study, there's not quite enough information. So let's start at the more benign end of the scale here. We used to spend a lot of time in IBM reading the new sales plan, partly because they made it so complex. But it was the most important thing you did all year. Understand within the legal boundaries of what you're doing, which activities, which sales outcomes are going to be rewarded the best.
Yep.
And then tailor, to, when appropriate, your sales strategies so that you maximise your earnings.
Yep.
And the company can't be surprised. That's actually what they were trying to do, is incentivate certain strategies and tactics.
Yep.
And to emphasise new products, new markets, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of okay at that end. If at the other end gaming means I'm double invoicing and crediting one back, then that's fraud.
Mm-hmm.
So let's be clear, they're very different kind of, gaming with a small g
Yep.
versus gaming with a big G.
Yep.
In between might be variations.
Yep.
So I don't mind a little creativity if that's how I've written it. They're the rules. That's the activity I'm trying to encourage. If it links with the larger strategy.
Yep.
And some sales managers, either because they're ex-salespeople themselves or they're being a bit naive, they sometimes write overly generous sales plans, find themselves then paying out more than they might have anticipated.
Yep.
But they wrote the rules.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an example of that in the movie Goodfellas, where they're skimming from the casino, and it gets up to the guys at the top, and he says, it's known in the business as leakage, and the guy goes, "Leakage my balls. I want the guy who's stealing from us."
Yep.
So very good.
So there's an element of it that almost says, in a purely business sense, it's not worth the effort to chase down every leaking dollar. But I do still want to be looking for symptoms of potentially something larger going on.
Yep.
Yeah. So they can make business decisions. That's different from a personal values perspective. I never felt a need to chisel for $1. Some people are a bit more creative along those lines.
Yep. All right, well, look, that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me, Greg, in the studio and for the opportunity to interview you about your new book, So Now You're a Sales Manager, What Every Sales Manager Should Know About Sales Management from Day One. Can you tell the listeners where they can find your book?
Well, any day now, and I really did believe when we scheduled this interview that it would have been on Amazon. It's taken a little more time to do the formatting. Any day now it'll be available on Amazon under that title. And or just keep an eye on my website, salesassess.com,
Yep.
sales-assess.com, and we'll have updates there.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much, Greg. All the best.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Clarke, and well done on all the homework that you did. You get an A+.
Oh, great stuff. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Cheers.